Welcome to our latest video on Dark Dimensions, where we delve into the disturbing world of the 15 most horrific serial killers in the UK. These individuals have committed some of the most heinous crimes in British history, leaving a trail of destruction and fear in their wake. This video is not for the faint of heart, but for those who are interested in true crime and the darkest depths of human nature. So, sit back, and join us on a journey into the minds of these notorious criminals. Be warned, the content in this video may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Number 1. Jack the Ripper, active in 1888, is considered one of the most infamous serial killers in history. He was active in the Whitechapel district of London, England, where he brutally murdered at least 5 women, all of whom were prostitutes. The murders were characterized by their viciousness, with the victims' throats being cut and their abdominal areas mutilated. The identity of the killer was never discovered, and the case remains one of the most famous unsolved criminal cases in history. Despite numerous theories and suspects, the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains a mystery. Number 2. Mary Ann Cotton, active 1853 to 1873, she was a British serial killer who murdered at least 21 people, including her own children and stepchildren, through poisoning. She would often remarry and take out life insurance policies on her husbands and children, and then collect the money after their deaths. It is believed that she used arsenic as her poison of choice. Her crimes were discovered after her last husband's death and she was arrested, tried, and hanged for murder in 1873. Her case was highly publicized at the time and she was known as the Black Widow and the Angel Maker. Number 3. Amelia Dyer was a British serial killer who operated in the late 19th century. She is believed to have murdered at least 400 infants in her care, by strangling them and disposing of their bodies in the Thames River. She was known as the baby farmer because she would take in infants, mostly illegitimate, and charge their parents for their care. However, instead of caring for the infants, she would murder them and dispose of their bodies. Dyer was finally caught in 1896 when the body of a baby girl wrapped in one of her advertisements was found in the Thames River. She was subsequently arrested and charged with murder. At her trial, she was found guilty and sentenced to hang. Amelia Dyer's story of infanticide and her trial were widely covered in the press at the time and her name became synonymous with the crime of baby farming. Number 4. John Bodkin Adams was a British GP and serial killer who was suspected of killing over 160 of his patients between 1946 and 1956. He was known for his love of luxury goods, and it is believed that he killed his patients in order to inherit their possessions. Adams was arrested in 1956 and charged with the murder of one of his patients, but was ultimately acquitted. Number 5. John Christie was a British serial killer who was active during the 1940s and early 1950s. He killed at least 8 people by strangling and carbon monoxide device and was sentenced to death for the murder of his wife Ethel. The killings were dramatized in the 1971 film 10 Rillington Place, in which Christie was played by Richard Attenborough. Innocent Timothy Evans was wrongly hanged after Christie murdered his wife and child. Christie's murders also inspired other works of art. Number 6. John George Haigh, also known as the Acid Bath Killer, was a British serial killer who murdered 6 people in the 1940s. He would lure his victims to his workshop, where he would kill them and then dissolve their bodies in vats of sulfuric acid. He was arrested in 1949, found guilty and hanged for his crimes. Number 7. Fred West was a British serial killer who committed at least 12 murders with his wife, Rose West, in the late 1960s and 1970s. The couple murdered young women and girls, many of whom were buried in the garden of their home in Gloucester. Fred West was arrested in 1994, but before his trial, he committed suicide in prison. Rose West was found guilty and is serving a life sentence. Number 8. Myra Hindley was a British serial killer who, along with her lover Ian Brady, murdered at least 5 children and young people in the 1960s. The couple, known as the Moors Murderers, buried their victims on Saddleworth Moor in Manchester. Hindley was arrested in 1965 and was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 9. Donald Neilson, also known as the Black Panther, was a British armed robber, murderer, and kidnapper. He murdered 3 men between 1971 and 1974. In January 1975, Neilson killed his kidnapped victim Leslie Whittle. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1976 and remained in prison until his demise in 2011. His life inspired the 1977 film The Black Panther. Number 10. Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, was a British serial killer who murdered at least 13 women between 1975 and 1980. He would lure his victims to secluded areas and then attack them with a hammer. Sutcliffe was arrested in 1981 and was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 11. Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, was a British physician in 1970s to 1980s and is believed to have killed at least 250 of his patients, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Shipman, who was a GP, would inject his patients with lethal doses of diamorphine, and then forge the medical records to make it appear as if the patients had died of natural causes. Shipman was found guilty of 15 murders in 2000 and was sentenced to 15 life sentences. He died in prison in 2004. Number 12. John Martin Scripps, also known as the Garden City Butcher, was a British serial killer in the 1990s who murdered and dismembered at least 3 tourists in Singapore and Thailand while posing as a tourist himself. He was the first British citizen to be hanged in Singapore since the country's independence. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 1996. Number 13. Kenneth Erskine, also known as the Stockwell Strangler and the Heatwave Killer, was a British serial killer who murdered at least 7 elderly men and women during the late 1980s. Erskine, who was a burglar, targeted his victims by breaking into their homes and then raping and strangling them. He claimed that he was driven to kill by a whispering woman's voice that he heard coming from walls and doors, which he said gave him dizzy spells. Erskine was arrested, convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison in 1988. However, in 2009, his murder convictions were reduced to manslaughter, and he is currently being held at the high-security psychiatric hospital Broadmoor in Berkshire, England. Number 14. Beverly Allitt, also known as the Angel of Death, was a British nurse in 1991 who murdered 4 children and attempted to kill 3 others while working at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire, England. She targeted infants and children in her care, administering fatal doses of insulin and other drugs. Allitt was convicted of 4 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder in 1993 and was sentenced to 13 life sentences. Number 15. Levi Belfield, also known as the Bus Stop Stalker, was a British serial killer and rapist who murdered at least 3 young women in and around London, England between 2002 to 2004. He targeted women and girls who were alone and vulnerable, often attacking them near bus stops. Belfield was convicted of the murders in 2008 and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In conclusion, all of these serial killers were horrific in their own right and the heinous nature of their crimes is hard to comprehend. However, if one had to be deemed the most horrific, it would be difficult to choose between Harold Shipman and John Bodkin Adams. Shipman's position as a trusted GP, who is believed to have killed over 200 patients, and his method of gaining access to his victims makes his case particularly chilling. Similarly, John Bodkin Adams, who is suspected of having killed as many as 200 of his patients, also operated in a position of trust as a physician and was able to evade prosecution for many years. Please comment below on who you think the most horrific serial killer is. Thank you for watching our latest video on YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated and helps us continue to create valuable content for you. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel for more updates and content in the future. Thank you again for your support.